on the danger of confounding moral with personal deformity, with a hint to those who have the framing of advertisements for apprehending offenders by Charles Lamb. 1810, text of 1818. To the editor of The Reflector. Mr. Reflector, there is no science in their pretensions to which mankind are more apt to commit grievous mistakes than in the supposed very obvious one of physiognomy. I quarrel not with the principles of this science, as they are laid down by learned professors. Much less am I disposed, with some people, to deny its existence altogether as any inlet of knowledge that can be depended upon. I believe that there is, or may be, an art to read the mind's construction in the face. But then, in every species of reading, so much depends upon the eyes of the reader. If they are blear, or apt to dazzle, or inattentive, or strained with too much attention, the optic power will infallibly bring home false reports of what it reads. How often do we say, upon a cursory glance at a stranger, what a fine open countenance he has, who, upon second inspection, proves to have the exact features of a knave. Nay, in much more intimate acquaintances, how a delusion of this kind shall continue for months, years, and then break up all at once. Ask the married man, who has been so but for a short space pg 75 of time, if those blue eyes where, during so many years of anxious courtship, truth, sweetness, serenity, seem to be written in characters which could not be misunderstood. Ask him if the characters which they now convey be exactly the same. If for truth he does not read a dull virtue, the mimic of constancy, which changes not, only because it wants the judgment to make a preference. If for sweetness he does not read a stupid habit of looking pleased at everything. If for serenity he does not read animal tranquility, the dead pool of the heart, which no breeze of passion can stir into health. Alas, what is this book of the countenance good for, which when we have read so long, and thought that we understood its contents, there comes a countless list of heartbreaking errata at the end. But these are the pitiable mistakes to which love alone is subject. I have inadvertently wandered from my purpose, which was to expose quite an opposite blunder, into which we are no less apt to fall, through hate. How ugly a person looks upon whose reputation some awkward aspersion hangs, and how suddenly his countenance clears up with his character. I remember being persuaded of a man whom I had conceived an ill opinion of, that he had a very bad set of teeth, which, since I have had better opportunities of being acquainted with his face and facts, I find to have been the very reverse of the truth. That crooked old woman, I once said, speaking of an ancient gentlewoman, whose actions did not square altogether with my notions of the rule of right. The unanimous surprise of the company before whom I uttered these words soon convinced me that I had confounded mental with bodily obliquity, and that there was nothing tortuous about the old lady but her deeds. This humor of mankind to deny personal comeliness to those with whose moral attributes they are dissatisfied is very strongly shewn in those advertisements, which stare us in the face from the walls of every street, and with the tempting bait which they hang forth, stimulate at once cupidity and an abstract love of justice in the breast of every passing peruser. I mean, the advertisements offering rewards for the apprehension of absconded culprits, strayed apprentices, bankrupts who have conveyed away their effects, debtors that have run away from their bail. I observe that in exact proportion to the indignity with which the prosecutor, who is commonly the framer pg 76 of the advertisement, conceives he has been treated, the personal pretensions of the fugitive are denied, and his defects exaggerated. A fellow whose misdeeds have been directed against the public in general, and in whose delinquency no individual shall feel himself particularly interested, generally meets with fair usage. A coiner or a smuggler shall get off tolerably well. His beauty, if he has any, is not much underrated, his deformities are not much magnified. A runaway apprentice, who excites perhaps the next least degree of spleen in his prosecutor, generally escapes with a pair of bandy legs. If he has taken anything with him in his flight, a hitch in his gait is generally superadded. A bankrupt, who has been guilty of withdrawing his effects, if his case be not very atrocious, commonly meets with mild usage. But a debtor who has left his bail in jeopardy is sure to be described in characters of unmingled deformity. Here the personal feelings of the bail, which may be allowed to be somewhat poignant, are admitted to interfere, and, as wrath and revenge commonly strike in the dark, the colors are laid on with a grossness which I am convinced must often defeat its own purpose. The fish that casts an inky cloud about him that his enemies may not find him, cannot more obscure himself by that device than the blackening representations of these angry advertisers, must inevitably serve to cloak and screen the persons of those who have injured them from detection. I have before me at this moment one of these bills, which runs thus. Run away from his bail, John Tompkins, formerly resident in Princes Street, Soho, but lately of Clerkenwell. Whoever shall apprehend, or cause to be apprehended and lodged in one of his Majesty's jails, the said John Tompkins, shall receive the above reward. He is a thick-set, sturdy man, about 5 foot 6 inches high, halts in his left leg, with a stoop in his gait, with coarse red hair, nose short and cocked up, with little grey eyes. One of them bears the effect of a blow which he has lately received, with a pot belly, speaks with a thick and disagreeable voice, goes shabbily dressed, had on when he went away a greasy shag great coat with rusty yellow buttons. Now, although it is not out of the compass of possibility that John Tompkins aforesaid may comprehend, in his agree pg 77, able person all the above-mentioned aggregate of charms, yet, from my observation of the manner in which these advertisements are usually drawn up, though I have not the pleasure of knowing the gentleman, yet would I lay a wager that an advertisement to the following effect would have a much better chance of apprehending and laying by the heels this John Tompkins than the above description, although penned by one who, from the good services which he appears to have done for him, has not improbably been blessed with some years of previous intercourse with the said John. Taking, then, the above advertisement to be true, or nearly so, down to the words, left leg inclusive, though I have some doubt if the blemish there implied amount to a positive lameness, or be perceivable by any but the nearest friends of John, I would proceed thus. Leans a little forward in his walk, his hair thick and inclining to auburn, his nose of the middle size, a little turned up at the end, lively hazel eyes, the contusion, as its effects are probably gone off by this time, I judge better omitted, inclines to be corpulent, his voice thick but pleasing, especially when he sings, had on a decent shag great coat with yellow buttons. Now, I would stake a considerable wager, though by no means a positive man, that some such mitigated description would lead the beagles of the law into a much surer track for finding this ungracious varlet, than to set them upon a false scent after fictitious ugliness and fictitious shabbiness. Though, to do those gentlemen justice, I have no doubt their experience has taught them in all such cases to abate a great deal of the deformity which they are instructed to expect, and has discovered to them that the devil's agents upon this earth, like their master, are far less ugly in reality than they are painted. I am afraid, Mr. Reflector, that I shall be thought to have gone wide of my subject, which was to detect the practical errors of physiognomy, properly so called. Whereas I have introduced physical defects, such as lameness, the effects of accidents upon a man's person, his wearing apparel and as circumstances on which the eye of dislike, looking askance, may report erroneous conclusions to the understanding. But if we are liable, through a kind, or an unkind passion, to mistake so grossly concerning things so exterior and palpable, pg 78, how much more are we likely to err respecting those nicer and less perceptible hints of character in a face, whose detection constitutes the triumph of the physiognomist. To revert to those bestowers of unmerited deformity, the framers of advertisements for the apprehension of delinquents, a sincere desire of promoting the ends of public justice induces me to address a word to them on the best means of attaining those ends. I will endeavor to lay down a few practical, or rather negative, rules for their use, for my ambition extends no further than to arm them with cautions against the self-defeating of their own purposes. Imprimis, then, Mr. Advertiser, if the culprit whom you are willing to recover be one to whom in times past you have shewn kindness, and been disposed to think kindly of him yourself, but he has deceived your trust, and has run away, and left you with a load of debt to answer for him, sit down calmly, and endeavor to behold him through the spectacles of memory rather than of present conceit. Image to yourself, before you pen a tittle of his description, the same plausible, good-looking man who took you in, and try to put away from your mind every intrusion of that deceitful spectre which perpetually obtrudes itself in the room of your former friend's known visage. It will do you more credit to have been deceived by such a one, and depend upon it, the traitor will convey to the eyes of the world in general much more of that first idea which you formed, perhaps in part erroneous, of his physiognomy, than of that frightful substitute which you have suffered to creep in upon your mind and usurp upon it, a creature which has no archetype except in your own brain. If you be a master that have to advertise a runaway apprentice, though the young dog's faults are known only to you, and no doubt his conduct has been aggravating enough, do not presently set him down as having crooked ankles, He may have a good pair of legs and run away notwithstanding. Indeed, the latter does rather seem to imply the former. If the unhappy person against whom your laudable vengeance is directed be a thief, think that a thief may have a good nose, good eyes, good ears. It is indispensable to his profession that he be possessed of sagacity, foresight, vigilance. It is more than probable, then, that he is endued pg 79 with the bodily types or instruments of these qualities to some tolerable degree of perfectness. If petty larceny be his offense, I exhort you, do not confound meanness of crime with diminutiveness of stature. These things have no connection. I have known a tall man stoop to the basest action, a short man aspire to the height of crime, a fair man be guilty of the foulest actions, and see. Perhaps the offender has been guilty of some atrocious and aggravated murder. Here is the most difficult case of all. It is above all requisite that such a daring violator of the peace and safety of society should meet with his reward, a violent and ignominious death. But how shall we get at him? Who is there among us that has known him before he committed the offense, that shall take upon him to say he can sit down coolly and pen a dispassionate description of a murderer? The tales of our nursery, the reading of our youth, the ill-looking man that was hired by the uncle to dispatch the children in the wood, the grim ruffians who smothered the babes in the tower, the black and beetle-browed assassin of Mrs. Ratcliffe, the shag-haired villain of Mr. Monk Lewis, the Tarquin tread and millstone-dropping eyes of murder in Shakespeare, the exaggerations of picture and of poetry, what we have read and what we have dreamed of, rise up and crowd in upon us such eye-scaring portraits of the man of blood, that our pen is absolutely forestalled. We commence poets when we should play the part of strictest historians, and the very blackness of horror which the deed calls up serves as a cloud to screen the doer. The fiction is blameless. It is accordant with those wise prejudices with which nature has guarded our innocence, as with impassable barriers, against the commission of such appalling crimes. But meantime the criminal escapes, or if, owing to that wise abatement in their expectation of deformity, which, as I hinted at before, the officers of pursuit never fail to make, and no doubt in cases of this sort they make a more than ordinary allowance, if, owing to this or any accident, the offender is caught and brought to his trial, who that has been led out of curiosity to witness such a scene, has not with astonishment reflected on the difference between a real committer of a murder and the idea of one which he has been collecting and heightening all his life out of books, dreams, and see the pg 80 fellow, perhaps, is a sleek, smug-looking man, with light hair and eyebrows, the latter by no means jutting out or like a crag, and with none of those marks which our fancy had pre-bestowed upon him. I find I am getting unawares too serious. The best way on such occasions is to leave off, which I shall do by generally recommending to all prosecuting advertisers not to confound crimes with ugliness, or rather, to distinguish between that physiognomical deformity, which I am willing to grant always accompanies crime, and mere physical ugliness, which signifies nothing, is the exponent of nothing, and may exist in a good or bad person indifferently. Created